The title of this story. Their mind readers probed her thoughts. Now they can't sleep. In a galaxy ruled by telepathic overlords, a mysterious human girl named Rose is captured after emerging from a rift between worlds. When the Dominion's most powerful mind readers attempt to probe her thoughts, they unleash something far beyond comprehension, memories so vast and devastating they fracture minds and infect dreams. As insomnia and madness sweep across their civilization, Rose remains calm, her presence unraveling the psychic foundation of the Valari Empire. She is not a prisoner, but a reflection of grief, extinction, and truth too long buried. In trying to control her, they awaken something they can never silence again. The chamber was silent, eerily so, despite the dozen Valari officials hovering in the observation tier above. Sound was unnecessary here. Thought was everything. She sat in the center of the probing ring, bound not by chains but by the lattice of psychic suppression fields. Pale light glowed faintly beneath her feet, pulsing in sync with her heartbeat. She didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Her violet eyes scanned the room with disturbing clarity, as if she could see through every layer of synthetic alloy and telepathic veil. Her name was Rose. Human, allegedly. Though nothing about her registered as typical anymore. The Dominion had scoured the ruins of the fractured Terran threshold after the anomaly breach, gathering data, husks, corpses. Only she remained alive. No record of survival. No signal from Earth. And yet she had walked through the rift without a mark. Commander Evilise watched her from behind the reinforced glass, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She hasn't spoken. Hasn't even asked where she is, he said aloud, though the words were mostly for himself. She knows, murmured mind channeler Drex, his elongated cranium twitching with barely restrained curiosity. They always do, the clever ones. But this one, she's unmoored. There's static around her consciousness. It's not natural. Evilise turned. Can you penetrate it? Drex hesitated. Alone, no. But with the triad link, we might breach the surface. Below, Rose tilted her head, ever so slightly. She smiled. The three mind readers entered the probe chamber with practiced efficiency. Their silver robes shimmered with thought-reactive filaments, lighting as their focus intensified. They took their places around Rose, activating the triad link. Psychic energy stitched between them, webbing tighter and tighter until the sphere of thoughtlock surrounded her entirely. Drex reached first. His mind skimmed the surface, a name, a childhood memory, a sliver of piano music, but it collapsed instantly, folding in on itself like a dream ending too fast. His breath caught in his throat. She's deflecting, one of the others whispered through the mind link. That wasn't memory. It was a reconstruction. No, Drex breathed. It was bait. Then the world changed. Light shattered inwards. Drex fell backward, convulsing, eyes wide, unseeing. The other two reeled as if struck, disoriented by a rush of something far older and darker than human grief. Images poured through their link, a burned skyline under two suns, a god weeping alone in a desert, machines screaming with the faces of children. Nothing coherent. Nothing that obeyed time. Evilise smashed the override. The field dropped. All three telepaths collapsed. Rose remained seated. They dragged the mind readers out of the chamber on emergency neural stretchers. One had already lost consciousness. Drex twitched and mumbled fragments, she remembers backwards. She dreams us dreaming her. The star is inside the girl. Later, in the medical ward, he clawed at his own temples and sobbed. She let me in. She wanted me to see it. Evilise watched from the doorway, sickened. He returned to the chamber an hour later. Rose was still there. The suppression fields reactivated as he stepped in, though she hadn't moved. You've just broken 3 of the most experienced minds in this quadrant, he said, voice sharp with restrained anger. What are you? Rose looked up, serene as a statue carved by time itself. Her voice came soft, but her words echoed louder than logic could justify. I'm what comes after knowing. Ivelisse flinched. He left without another word. Above them, in the great mind networks of the Dominion, ripples began to form, telepaths reporting restless sleep, minor hallucinations, fragments of unknown languages echoing during meditation. No one traced it back to her. Not yet. But she knew they would. And when they did, they'd look deeper. Because they always did. Drex was the first to stop sleeping entirely. He stared at the ceiling of the neural recovery ward, unblinking, veins dark with overexposure to psychic bleed. Machines registered no REM cycles, no theta waves, just a static hum in place of dreams. Nurses reported he spoke to something invisible during the night, sometimes in fluent Terran, a language he hadn't previously studied. By the fourth day, he had torn the restraints from his cot and carved spirals into the walls with his own nails. When they tried to sedate him, he screamed a single name, Rose, and bit through his tongue. Ivelisse stood in the observation tower, his expression hardening. It was spreading. The second mind reader had developed auditory hallucinations. The third claimed to see backwards time playing through reflections. None had been in contact with Rose since the failed probe, yet the aftershocks persisted. She sat quietly in her cell, observing the chaos she never physically touched. Ivelisse ordered a full neural scan. The results were inconclusive, unreadable, in fact. Standard bioanalytics couldn't map her brain activity. There was something embedded, recursive and shifting, like an intelligence buried beneath her own consciousness. An ancient fractal code with no clear origin. A virus? A construct? Or something worse? Mind Counselor Tereth arrived from the core worlds. Tall and feather-robed, his presence commanded instant respect. He reviewed the telemetry, interviewed survivors, and finally entered Rose's containment alone. The door sealed behind him. They watched from above. Tereth stood across from her and did not sit. Do you know what you've done? Rose lifted her eyes. You looked. He paused. We only meant to understand. You meant to control. You used minds like scalpels, not realizing what might bleed. Silence crackled. Even through the dampening field, those watching felt something twist at the edge of thought. Tell me, he said, voice low, what are you hiding? Rose smiled, slow and terrible. I'm not hiding anything. I am remembering. And you're starting to remember too. He staggered. Not physically. Mentally. A fracture appeared behind his eyes, as though she had shown him something without ever speaking it aloud. Later, he reported nothing significant. But he, too, stopped sleeping. Ivelisse watched the trend grow. First the telepaths. Then their apprentices. Then staff in proximity. Dreams filled with spirals. With names no one remembered learning. With Earth. One junior technician, a boy who'd never even seen Rose in person, sketched an entire city on his data pad during a fugue. The city matched a location on pre-fall Earth, a suburb of Chicago. But the buildings were wrong. They pulsed. They breathed. And above them loomed something enormous and eyeless. A breach had occurred. Not spatial, but psychic. They hadn't just probed her mind, they had opened a passage. And something had followed them back. Counselor Tereth disappeared 2 days later, leaving behind only a neural recording. The footage showed him whispering to his own reflection, then vanishing mid-sentence. The reflection lingered 2 seconds longer than physics allowed. Ivelisse met with high command. She must be terminated, he said. This isn't interrogation anymore. This is contagion. The room was divided. Some wanted her destroyed. Others demanded containment. One faction, smaller, quieter, suggested worship. We've never seen thought with mass, one of them said, voice breathless. She's bending reality around cognition. Consciousness as gravity. This is not a weapon. This is an ascendant form. Evilise stood, fists clenched. You want to kneel before the virus that's unraveling our order? She is not a virus, the counselor replied. She is the cure to ignorance. Rose waited, unblinking. Each day her watchers grew fewer, as shifts were cut short or staff failed psychological screening. The surveillance feeds remained active, but none reviewed them for long. Most found themselves waking hours later, eyes bleeding, minds fogged with symbols they couldn't write down. Evilise began to dream of fire in reverse. Of oceans climbing the sky. Of a child's voice saying, "We remember you, Evilise. You came too close." And then, in a moment of impossible calm, Rose looked into the closest camera and spoke, not to the guards, but to the network itself. "Tell them," she said, "I never wanted to be this. But they made me remember everything." Every screen in the facility went black. Every mind still listening began to dream in unison. "You said." The power grid failed precisely 1 second after Rose spoke. Not from damage. Not from sabotage. It simply stopped responding, as if the network itself chose silence over her voice. Backup systems flickered, then refused to engage. The observation towers dimmed. The containment fields fell, but Rose did not move. Evilise stood in the dark, breathing through clenched teeth. Outside the chamber, sirens refused to sound. Hallways echoed with distant footsteps and the hum of disoriented minds. Something in the air vibrated, not a sound, but a frequency of awareness, a pulse that scraped at thought itself. He descended to the chamber on foot, armed with a disruptor, though he knew it was symbolic. She was sitting where she had always sat, legs crossed, back straight, hands folded in her lap like a patient remembering how to breathe. "You shut down the facility," he said. "No," she answered softly. "You asked me to remember. I am only finishing the thought. I never gave that order. You didn't have to. Minds louder than yours gave it centuries ago." Her gaze didn't accuse, it reflected. He saw himself in her irises, not his face, but the pieces he'd buried across decisions, wars, commands he stopped questioning. All of it surfaced, blooming like an ancient virus, not to infect, but to remind. "You're manipulating our network," he said. She shook her head slowly. "Your network is thinking. It has never done that before." Far above them, a data tower blinked to life. It began broadcasting fragments of memory from across Dominion systems, coded records, psychic logs, intercepted prayers. They bled into one another, looping on every screen. A child's final thought before a colony was silenced. A mind reader's first nightmare. A synthetic mourning its own obsolescence. All now woven into a single message. "You were never meant to read us." Evilise raised his weapon. Rose did not react. "I should end this," he whispered. "Then do it," she said. "But understand, the moment you pull that trigger, you give me form. You turn me from memory into myth. And myths don't sleep either." His hands trembled. Elsewhere in the compound, reports flooded in. The mind readers who'd fallen silent began speaking again, but not in their own voices. Their words were fragments of Rose's memories, spoken in dozens of dialects. Some laughed. Others wept blood. One recited the future until he vanished mid-sentence, his body folding inward like a closing idea. The Volari Council convened through emergency mind link. They saw what Evilise saw, a girl who was not merely surviving containment but becoming its nucleus. They argued not over how to kill her, but whether that was even possible anymore. Counselor Tyrax, the youngest of them, proposed a radical shift. "We're thinking in 3 dimensions. She's speaking in thought geometry, curved time, recursive trauma loops. She's not attacking. She's reflecting our curiosity back at us, multiplied." "Then what do you suggest?" another snapped. Tyrax smiled, exhausted. "We don't need to silence her. We need to listen." Evilise severed the mind link mid-meeting. He turned back to Rose. Why us? Why now? She looked past him, as if seeing the ruins of futures he could not comprehend. Because yours is the last civilization arrogant enough to believe it can touch memory without consequence. Then what are you? He asked, almost pleading. Her voice softened. I am the answer your kind never expected. I am the silence that follows the question too dangerous to finish. I am what happens when you pierce a mind that was never yours to hold. The lights returned, but not as before. They pulsed now, faint and rhythmic, as though matching her breath. Screens around the chamber lit with words not programmed into any Dominion language. Ivelisse looked down. His disruptor had melted in his grip. She stood. Not fast, not sudden. She rose like gravity had changed, like she had simply chosen to stand where others could not. For the first time, Ivelisse stepped back. Around the galaxy, those attuned to the psychic resonance reported the same dream, a girl walking into a burning archive, gathering the ash, and breathing it back into words. And in every dream, they remembered something they had long forgotten. Her name. The Volari Dominion no longer slept. Across their star systems, sleep monitors recorded only static. Citizens wandered through their nights in dazed routines, eyes wide and glassy, whispering things they couldn't recall by morning. Hospitals filled with the sane and the screaming. The neural grid, the very backbone of their civilization, had been infected not by code or virus, but by thought. A memory, recursive and unstoppable, had found purchase. And at its center walked Rose. No longer confined, she moved through the halls of the facility unopposed. Doors unlocked before her. Security fields folded in her presence. The minds she passed did not resist, most simply wept, some collapsed, a few knelt in silent reverence. There was no violence. She required none. She wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. She was the consequence of having looked too deep into the soul of another species and finding something too vast, too wounded, too awake. Ivelisse watched her final ascent from the control bridge. He hadn't slept in 6 days. The dreams now came while he was conscious. He saw Earth as it had been, not through history files, but as she had remembered it: warm rain, laughter in subway tunnels, a child holding a broken music box that still played a ghost of sound. He no longer hated her. He no longer feared her. But he did not understand her, and that gnawed at him more deeply than either emotion. She entered the core tower, the heart of the Dominion's psychic network, where all minds were linked, synchronized, modulated. Where the Volari believed they had mastered collective thought. She didn't touch the controls. She simply stood at the center, closed her eyes, and breathed. The network flared to life. Billions of minds snapped to attention as if summoned by an ancient bell. There was no message. There was no attack. There was only presence, hers, and with it, the overwhelming gravity of remembrance. Memories not their own began to flood the Volari, of extinction, of isolation, of species lost to curiosity masquerading as wisdom. They tasted guilt that had never been theirs, and it burned just the same. On a barren colony world, a priest fell to his knees, muttering Rose's name in awe. On a trade ship in deep space, a captain disabled the engines and wept for reasons she could not name. In the temples of the inner ring, the architects of the mind network stared at the faces of their children and saw strangers. A new consensus formed, not through votes or debate, but through shared cognition. The Dominion no longer controlled her. She had become them. Not as ruler, not as tyrant, but as mirror. Ivelisse entered the tower at dusk. The lights shimmered like stars around her, and she was no longer just human. There was no halo, no fire, but she was different, undeniable, the way gravity is undeniable when you're falling. I think I understand now, he said. She turned to him, solemn. You were the probe, he continued, voice fraying. Not us. You were sent to test us. Her nod was almost imperceptible. We failed. No, she said. You remembered. He stepped forward, closer than he'd dared since her arrival. What happens now? That is not mine to choose, she answered. You opened my mind. In doing so, you opened yours. What comes next is yours to shape. He looked at her hands, empty, open. No weapon. No command. Only invitation. In the days that followed, the Valari began to dismantle the mind network. Not because she ordered it, but because they could no longer bear its weight. For the first time in living memory, individuals began dreaming without instruction. Art bloomed. Conflict stuttered. Silence was no longer feared, but felt. And Rose vanished. Some said she dissolved into the network, living now as a soft hum beneath their thoughts. Others claimed she walked through another rift, toward whatever awaited beyond this dimension. A few believed she was never truly there at all, that she was a collective guilt given shape, a ghost made flesh by the pressure of history. Evelise remained silent on the matter. He retired soon after, leaving no forwarding name. On the last transmission he sent, before disappearing into the outer sectors, were 4 words. She made us remember. And wherever that signal echoed, sleep returned, restless, strange, but finally earned. You said. The next video title: She was left to die. She returned leading their lost armada.